In lesson 12.3, day 2, we're learning about trig functions of general angles. So we learned about trig functions for triangles. Now we're going to do it for angles that are in any of the 4 quadrants. There's an acronym that will help you remember the signs. It's ASTC. Some people say all students take calculus or all students take chemistry. So in quadrant 1, put an A. In quadrant 2, that's S. Quadrant 3, you put a T. In quadrant 4, you put a C. Alright, so this tells you out of sine, cosine, and tangent. This tells you which ones are positive. So in quadrant 1, all 3 of them are positive. In quadrant 2, sine is positive, so cosine and tangent are negative. In quadrant 3, tangent's positive, so sine and cosine are negative. And in quadrant 4, cosine is positive, so the other 2 are negative. So that's what you do if it's in quadrant 1, 2, 3, or 4. Well, what if the angle is in between 2 quadrants? So let's say the angle is 270 degrees. That is called a quadrantal. So if it doesn't land in a quadrant, but it lands in between 2 quadrants, so right on the x or y axis, that's called a quadrantal. Alright, for problems that are not quadrantals, you need to remember your special right triangles. So a 45, 45, 90 triangle is isosceles because it has 2 congruent angles and 2 congruent sides. So if this is a right angle, this other angle has to be 45 as well. You should recall that the ratio of the sides are 1, 1, and then the hypotenuse 2 times as long as either of the legs. Okay, for a 30, 60, 90 triangle, the ratio of the sides is 1, and the 1 always goes across from the 30. Rad 3 goes across from the 60-degree angle, and the hypotenuse is 2. A lot of people get mixed up. They forget that 2 is bigger than rad 3. Remember that 2 is radical 4, so radical 4 is definitely bigger than radical 3. Alright, so for these problems, you'll have to recall from the last lesson what a reference angle is. So first, let's sketch. And the directions say we need to find exact values, so we're not going to use a calculator. Calculator will give decimals, and once you round a decimal, then your answer is no longer exact. Okay, so I've sketched the initial side. 150 is positive, so I need to rotate counterclockwise. 90, 60 more, so around there. Now I draw the terminal side. Okay, so now recall the bow tie rule. You have to draw a triangle from that spot. The triangle always uses the x-axis. Then we put theta right next to the origin, so theta goes in here. We have to find out how big theta is. So theta would be, so remember we went 60 here, so then theta has to be 30. And now we know that the angle at the top is 60 degrees. This is obviously a right angle in the bottom left corner. So let's label the sides. Across from the 30-degree angle is 1. Across from the 60, that's the rad 3, and the hypotenuse is 2. They want to know the sine of 150. So So let's remember what quadrant we're in, A, S, T, C. So sine is going to be positive, and then from theta we have to do opposite over hypotenuse. So the answer is 1/2. Okay, for number 2, let's sketch the angle first. Start with the initial side. Rotate 90, 180. From 180, we need to go 45 more, which is halfway. Okay, drawing the triangle. So the triangle uses the terminal side and the x-axis. We know where theta is. Instead of writing theta, I'm just going to write how big theta is. So theta is there, 45 degrees. I'll write theta next to it. So there's theta. This is the right angle. This is 45. So for a 45, 45, 90 triangle, the legs are 1 and the hypotenuse is rad 2. Alright, so we're doing cosine. ASTC. We know that tangent is positive in the third quadrant, so cosine is going to be negative. So whatever we get, it should be negative. Alright, cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, so it's going to be negative 1 over rad 2. Multiply the top and the bottom by radical 2. And we get the answer is negative rad 2 over 2. Alright, let's start number 3 by sketching the initial side. And we rotate counterclockwise, 90, 180, 270, so 30 more. Okay, use the terminal side and the x-axis to draw the triangle, then close your triangle. Alright, so this was 30. Remember, I went 270 and then 30 more. So then this has to be 60. Here's the right angle, so the 30's down here. Is where the 60 is. And since we want tangent, tangent's going to be negative because we're in quadrant 4. Only cosine is positive in quadrant 4. So this is going to be negative. And then from here, we can do SOHCAHTOA, so opposite. Oh, I didn't label the sides yet. So across from the 30 is the 1. Across from the 60 is the radical 3. And the hypotenuse is the 2. Okay, let's try this again. From the 60-degree angle, we have to do opposite over adjacent. So that'll just be radical 3 divided by 1. And it's negative because of the quadrant we're in. Alright, so now we're getting into the reciprocal functions. Remember, ASTC only applies to sine, cosine, and tangent. So I'll tell you how to figure out the reciprocal ones. So there's our initial side. We're not going to go very far. We go 30 degrees. Draw the triangle. Alright, so this was 30 degrees, which makes this 60 degrees, and there's the right angle, 90 degrees. Right, across from the 30 is the 1, across from the 60 is the rad 3, and the hypotenuse is 2. Alright, so secant. Secant is the reciprocal of cosine. So cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. That means secant is hypotenuse over adjacent. In quadrant 1, everything is positive, so we don't have to worry about that. Okay, multiply the top by rad 3 and the bottom by radical 3, and you get your answer. Okay, cotangent. That's the reciprocal of tangent. So I'm going to draw the initial side first, like we always do. Rotate 90, 180, 270. So from 270, we go 60 more. Triangle uses the X, the terminal side, and then closes it. All right, so this was 60, remember, 270 and then 60 more. So this is 30. We almost went 360. We needed 30 degrees more. So there's the right angle, which means the 60-degree angle is down here. Across from the 30, you always put a 1. The 60 is radical 3, and the hypotenuse is 2. Alright, so theta's in here. Let's label these sides. This is opposite over here. This is adjacent. And this is hypotenuse. So if tangent is opposite over adjacent, then cotangent is adjacent over opposite. So we're going to do adjacent over opposite. And let's also figure out if it's positive or negative. ASTC. So we know tangent is negative, so cotangent is also negative. If the reciprocal is negative, then the number is also negative. So if tangent is negative, cotangent has to be negative. So negative, and now let's do adjacent over opposite. And I don't need to write the 1 underneath. Alright, so for number 6, cosecant is the reciprocal of sine. We're going to figure out what sine is and then take the reciprocal. So from 90 we go 30 more. Drawing the triangle. So this was 30, so this has to be 60. There's a 30 up here in the right angle. Across from the 30 is where you put the 1. Across from the 60 is rad 3, and the hypotenuse is 2. Alright, ASTC. So sine is positive, and that means cosecant has to be positive as well. All right, sine is opposite over hypotenuse. So that means cosecant is hypotenuse over opposite. So hypotenuse over opposite. Multiply the top by radical 3 and the bottom by radical 3. On the back, we're doing the same thing, except the angle is in radians. Okay, so on your paper, this should say 2 pi over 3. So remember that 360 degrees equals 2 pi, which means 180 degrees equals pi. So what you could do is convert this to degrees. So this becomes 2 times 180 divided by 3. 180 divided by 3 is 60. 60 times 2 is 120 degrees. So now we're just going to figure out what cosine of 120 is. Sketch the initial side. Rotate counterclockwise. 90. 30 more makes 120. Theta is going to be the bottom right of that triangle, which is 60 degrees. That makes the top angle 30 degrees, and here's a right angle. So across from the 30 is 1, across from the 60 is rad 3, and the hypotenuse is 2. Okay, remember ASTC. So we're in the quadrant where sine is positive, so that means cosine is going to be negative. Cosine is, from this angle, cosine is adjacent divided by hypotenuse. So the answer is negative 1/2. All right, so for number 8, replace pi with 180. So this is cosecant of pi divided by 6. Pi equals 180. So 180 divided by 6 is 30. So we're going to find the cosecant of 30 degrees. So we're going to be in quadrant 1. We know that in quadrant 1, everything is positive. Draw the triangle. So this angle was 30. This angle has to be 60, and here's our right angle. So across from the 30 is where the 1 goes. Across from the 60, rad 3, and the hypotenuse is 2. Okay, cosecant is the reciprocal of sine. Sine is opposite over hypotenuse, so we're going to flip that and do hypotenuse over opposite. So 2 over 1, which is just 2. Remember, don't use a calculator for these because the directions say find exact values. Okay. So again, replace pi with 180. So I'm just going to call this 180 divided by 4. 180 divided by 4 is 45. 45 times 5 is 225. Start with the initial side. Rotate counterclockwise, 90, 180. So after 180, you need 45 more. All right, so this angle was 45. That's what we added to 180. This is 45 as well. There's our right angle. So we're not going to use 1, rad 3, 2, because that's for 30, 60, 90 triangles. We're going to use 1, 1, and then the hypotenuse is rad 2. Okay, ASTC. Tangent is positive in this quadrant, so cotangent, which is the reciprocal of tangent, is also positive. Tangent is opposite over adjacent, so we're going to do adjacent over opposite. 1 divided by 1 is 1. All right, and the last one, we're just plugging into our calculator. So they give us that the velocity is 15 feet per second. So for v sub 0, I'm going to plug in 15 squared, And the little 0 down there just means after 0 seconds. So initial means after 0 time has passed. Then we're going to take the sine of 2 times, and then these are thetas. That's a theta, and this is a theta. Sine, and then 2 times, they give us the angle is 25 degrees. This is divided by 32 plus 15 cosine, and then 25 degrees. Alright, so grab a calculator. Make sure the calculator is in degree mode. So if you push mode on the TI-84, the third line should say degree. Okay, plugging this into a calculator, 15 squared times sine of, and you could just write 50, since 2 times 25 is 50, sine of 50 divided by 32 plus 15 cosine 25, you should get that R equals 18.98, rounded to the nearest tenth is 19.0, and the units are feet. Alright, that's it for 12.3.